watching wildlife shows got me through the corona crisis. It really helped. Oh yeah, like there's predators and you just got to deal with them. Safety is not a natural feature of human beings. We're never safe. And whenever we try to be safe, we'll get ourselves in a worse position. So it's great to realise I'm an animal and I've got predators. And they're really good at disguising themselves. And they want my stuff. They want my body and soul and earnings. Of course they do. That's what it is to be alive. And I've just got to be sharp and know that they're there and I'm here and I'm going to keep invisible as I can or as far as I can from them.
Hello, I am Codyellingham and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. In this episode I speak with Cecilia Macaulay, a permaculture designer from Australia. We discuss what permaculture means, her story, and how aspects of Bitcoin thinking have entered into her practice. We talk about the state as a predator in the ecosystem of humanity, as well as the importance of cleaning up your house and building social capital and communities, especially when times get tough. If you would like to support this show and my work, please consider tipping some sats to the show's wallet. You can use a Podcasting 2.0 app such as Fountain or Breeze, and you can leave a comment letting me know what you think. Otherwise, pass this episode on to a friend who you think may enjoy it. Every bit of support helps, and I do appreciate it. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. My emails are always open, hello@thetransformationofvalue.com. Otherwise, on to the show. So how's your day been?
Oh, floating on a bubble of love after my workshop yesterday. Yeah. Getting all the good before and after photos from my decluttering and people thinking I'm an angel.
Yeah, decluttering a house, it's become certainly quite popular lately. You've got the likes of Marie Kondo and different people talking about this idea of cleaning up your house. It sounds a bit basic, but it really is quite profound, isn't it?
Well, we're powerless. There's just nothing we can do about this clutter in our house.
Yeah.
And I was talking to some eco people about Bitcoin and they were sort of spitting out greed. And I was thinking, what about what's in your house that you just can't let go of? So, we've all got this grandma grab inside us that, says, I'm going to die without the resources. I need to keep them.
Yeah.
And we express it in different ways.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this decluttering project, it's interesting, but really your background, Cecilia, is permaculture. So at a high level, how would you describe permaculture, your relationship to it? How did you find it, and what is it?
Oh, well, permaculture is creating ecosystems. It's finding different things that are better together and putting them together. A tomato and basil, or two people, or share house, or a food forest. It's a bit like playing chess with life, which is a great use of some people's brains, and I'm one of those people.
Interesting. So you talk about ecosystems. Originally, I understand permaculture emerged from Australia, where you're from, and that's sort of gone on to become a international phenomena, something people are sort of revisiting, perhaps reconnecting with. But it sort of seems like it came from this maybe more environmental connection to the land, sustainable farming, these kinds of ideas. But like those roots, how would you describe the roots of permaculture?
Oh, everyone's got their own idea where it came from, depending on what they already love. Wikipedia for a while said permaculture's origin is a forestry book written by a Japanese guy in the 1930s, an anti-war activist. And so it was, and it did influence Bill Mollison, the granddaddy of permaculture. The two permaculture co-founders, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, adore Japan. David Holmgren sleeps on tatami, and Bill Mollison was very influenced by Masanobu Fukuoka, the One Straw Revolution natural farmer. We do not need humans. Anything humans do is stupider than what nature can do. Get out of nature's way and things will be well. And he proved it was so, but it took him 50 years to get out of nature's way in his farm.
Interesting.
Yes, and actually get a yield.
Oh, really? What do you mean?
Well, for 20 years he failed. Like when he first had, this is Masanobu Fukuoka, we're doing a tangent, but it's worth it, who was a white-bearded, gorgeous old guy who spoke in a rough country accent, who I met at Waseda University in 1995. Anyway, he wrote The One Straw Revolution, And when he was 25, he said he got sick, woke up from a near-death experience, and he said, no more pruning my mikan trees, no more fertilizer or any human thing, and I'm not cutting them anymore. And they all died. And he said, oh, well, maybe they were too civilized, these trees, so I need to go back further. And he went to the mountains and found the ancestor of the mikan tree and worked out what shape it should be. And 20 years later, of doing like lean management of his farm, fail fast, fail quickly, he was getting better yields than everyone around him. So he got disciples.
Yeah, had to go back and sort of rebuild, go further up the chain to rebuild and understand how you can have a better yield and better outcomes.
And it's probably the same thing for our health. You know, we might want to say, I want to be independent of the medical system. I don't want to be taking drugs for whatever ails me, my diabetes or depression. But you've got to start like really basic, like how do you get your house right so you can attract friends and be supported and feel strong.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Well, coming back to Bill Mollison, who I know you've spent a bit of time with Bill when he was still alive, and
yes, I was so lucky.
Yeah, and as you say, sort of considered one of the fathers of permaculture as a concept. And originally, was that coming out of Tasmania, Australia?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, quite an incredible place, and certainly reminds me a lot of New Zealand. But so you spent some time down that way, or?
No, I didn't ever work with Bill. I just meet him at parties, or he'd invite me to his party or dinner, and so I never worked with him.
Okay.
Which is probably a good thing, because I didn't want to have a falling out with him, and sometimes you just suddenly...
Well, speaking of what Bill wrote about, though, so his early work, his seminal work on permaculture, a reviewer once described his teachings as sedacious, and he said, it is very perceptive. I teach self-reliance, which is the world's most subversive practice. I teach people how to grow their own food, which is shockingly subversive. And there's something about that which I think really aligns with what I'm looking at in terms of Bitcoin, in terms of sovereignty with money, with the way we live in the face of the state. And it seems like there's maybe some connections there where you leave something like the economy up to the government to look after, and they tend to do the human thing, which is to touch it and to mess with it and generally to break it. But when you let it flourish and be its own ecosystem in a free market, it tends to work for the best. So how do you see the connections between permaculture thinking and Bitcoin?
Well, I've cultivated ignorance around Bitcoin. I do have a fund of money for wasting, which I used on Bitcoin. I don't really know about Bitcoin, and we all have ways to future-proof ourselves. And mine has been more community, being super useful. No matter what happens, people will want me. I'll have friends. I'll be safe without money because I've got skills that people need. So Bitcoin isn't my savior. However, people who are into Bitcoin, they're probably my people. They live in the future. They're resourceful. They're rebellious. They might be seditious. And we've probably got, good conversations to have with each other, like having more money than other people in a disaster, could be good for you. But having less needs in a disaster is the same as having more money. I was really impressed the way you made me my tea by boiling water in a saucepan instead of buying money and having a kettle. Like you're not being wasteful. Oh, that's cool. And the more we can do that, like make sure that we're being really efficient, the more our Bitcoin's worth, if that's what you're into, or whatever you've got a stash of in your squirrely ways. So that would be my contribution.
It's interesting you talk about value to others, because I think that's actually touching on something a bit deeper and probably more relevant here, which is that, your work in the economy, your service to others in your immediate local community is really important. And we were able to account for that in our local community through a series of favours, and kind of you tend to sort of know who's pulling their weight, right? But that system unfortunately does break down at a global level, and so we see within family and friends you can generally kind of help each other out and money isn't required. It's sort of like you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. But when you're doing international trade or you're part of a global economy, which we are, you kind of need something else to fill that gap. And I think that's where we see the issue with the traditional financial system, where you've got a money that can be printed away, it can be messed with, it can be kind of tutued with by the government. Whereas when you've got Bitcoin, you've got something that's a little bit more truthful. And so I see what you're doing is actually quite profound and actually very similar to the way a lot of Bitcoiners would think. I would say that they see a value in practical skills, kind of being genuine to, whether it's growing your own food, being able to repair things yourself. These kinds of skills, I think, go hand in hand with a lot of Bitcoin thinking. But still at a higher level, there is always the role for global trade or just trade with people you don't know personally. And so you can't necessarily trust each other. And so you do need some third-party trusted mechanism, what we would call money, for sort of negotiating that, perhaps.
I guess some people do. But I've been living in the gift economy for about 30 years now, and so far so good.
Tell us more.
Well, I run webinars a few times a year on different decluttered topics. It's actually permaculture disguised as decluttering, or create a sacred space anywhere in your home, or how to share a bathroom in a share house harmoniously. And people pay as they like. It's not, but I sell it a bit better than that. And some people pay $5, some pay $100. And afterwards, the people who pay a bit more, I give them a bit of extra free surprise coaching, and then they become my clients and they pay me actual money. And I've got friends all around the world, and I turn up at their house and I just help them because I like them, and they're doing things no one else is doing. So this is where the trust comes in. There's no one else like you. I'm going to be good to you. I'm staying with my friend Remy. She's so beautiful, and her strong points and weak points work perfectly with mine. She writes my profiles. I tidy her, declutter downstairs. I lived for a few months a year with a very famous designer in Tokyo and his family. The green man running exit sign? Professor Ota.
Yeah.
And every morning I'd help him with his translations, and his wife would cook my dinner at night. And that was, not a paid thing. It wasn't family. It was so different. But the reason he invited me first was I saw him speaking at an event, and then afterwards we met over these tea bowls, and I talked about tea ceremony, and he loves it and I love it. So just our antennas lit up. You're my kind of person, and I'm going to be good to you forever.
Yeah. It's almost like it's like value for value, right? You sort of...
It's a bit like the sloth economy. Do you know much about sloth economics?
Tell me.
So sloths don't like to work very hard. They want to work as little as possible and spend as little as possible. So if you mess with them, they'll punch you, but they'll punch you at a rate that's like this, and it won't land hard. So they'll even climb all the way down the tree to do their toilet, which takes a whole day and exposes them to predators, to bury it and then climb all the way up. And so scientists thought they're stupid as well as lazy, but it turns out they're fertilizing their tree. They don't want it to wash away in the tropical storms. They really cultivate their source of sustenance. And it gets even better. They don't fight other sloths for the other sloth's tree because they don't like the taste of it. They like their trees. I like my people. Yeah. And we can see each other a mile away. And my people, my former housemates from years ago, they come back to me and they're good to me.
What do you think, and thank you for sharing that, what do you think, though, when we're talking about community? Obviously, you've got friends, you've got family, you've got communities you can choose. But then you've also got communities that you can't choose so easily, things such as your relationship to the state. And this is something I think, I look at certainly quite a lot within Bitcoin, is this kind of involuntary relationship we have with the state, and the way we sort of must, for whether we're doing things for free or not, we still have to pay taxes. We still have to be part of this system that's not able to be opted out of. How do you see that? What's sort of your paradigm for looking at that relationship?
Helen Keller, the great blind lady from 100 years ago, my hero, she said that safety is not a natural feature of human beings. We're never safe. And whenever we try to be safe, we'll get ourselves in a worse position. So it's great to realize I'm an animal and I've got predators, and they're really good at disguising themselves, and they want my stuff. They want my body and soul and earnings. Of course they do. That's what it is to be alive. And I've just got to be sharp and know that they're there and I'm here, and I'm going to keep as invisible as I can, or as far as I can from them.
Yeah.
Watching wildlife shows got me through the corona crisis. It really helped. Oh yeah, like there's predators and you just got to deal with them.
Well, it's a bit of a dance, right? Like you've got different kinds of animals in this ecosystem, and some have a certain power of violence, a monopoly over violence. Others maybe have numbers, and so you've got this kind of hunter and hunted kind of arrangement. But then there's other things that can emerge, and again we come back to Bitcoin, encryption, other privacy and freedom technology, which means you can kind of play it a bit differently. You can choose how you reveal yourself. It's like zebra camouflage, or other animals have developed these mechanisms for defending themselves. Some, in many cases, quite passive mechanisms as well. They're not necessarily overtly fighting back. They're defending, not attacking, which is quite interesting. But I find your analogy of the kind of animal ecosystem quite interesting.
Yeah, we just have to accept that's what it is, and that's calming, because some news would surprise me and I'd say, I can't believe it. And then I'd say, well, believe it, because that's reality. That's the human animal.
So you were living in Australia during the COVID era?
Yes, in Melbourne, the world's greatest lockdown city.
Yeah, that must have been tough for you.
It was a surprise.
Yeah.
I thought I knew about human nature and I was wrong.
Yeah. How has that changed your relationship to Australia generally, or?
Yeah, so I've got like 50% new friends because it was very divisive.
Yeah.
I don't worry. I have to plan for maybe not being able to travel internationally for the rest of my life. I love Japan so much. I've been coming here every year for 30 years, except for a couple. So I might have to make a little Japan in Australia.
Yeah.
And just get all the cool people to come and stay with me, which is, of course, is possible.
Yeah, well, there's something to be said about that relationship where you didn't really notice it until it happened, that they could just turn off international travel. They could just turn off their ability to go and see family, which, as you know, in my case, having family and friends over here, it was like, wow, they can just stop you doing that. And especially in the case of New Zealand and to an extent Australia as kind of islands, it's like, yeah, really, it became a prison. And it was through the directive and the policy of government. And again, you've got options, there's ways around it, but it does get very difficult. Are you going to have to charter a boat? Are you going to have to swim? You're going to have to develop fins, It's certainly problematic. But look, that era has, I think, for the most part, the COVID hysteria has winded down, but there's always the spectre that it could flare back up, something like that. And so how do you see permaculture in your work, this kind of resilience that you're building? Like, tell me more about that. How are you building up this network and this permanence to sustain yourself?
So my work represents a tiny, rare niche in permaculture. All permies aren't like me. We're very different. So if there's any permies listening, don't say, that's not permaculture, because no, permaculture's diverse. I think my permaculture's the best, but it's just the best for me. So I focus very much on human ecosystems, the companion planting of people, how to set up share houses that the residents just don't want to leave and they just want to be sweet to each other. Can I make you a cup of tea? You go first. No, you go first, because it's just the best place. And it was my dream to set up such a share house, and I did. And it was paradise.
Where was that? It
was in Sydney, Annandale, 10 minutes from Central Station. I think urban Sydney's greatest concentration of chickens. You'd hear them every night as you went walking. It was a beautiful neighbourhood of old houses renovated with love, and people with children still living near the city, hanging on in there with their mortgages.
How did you find that? Because I used to live in Sydney, and I found it's a very concrete kind of money city generally. Like, how did you find that contrast with like a permaculture community?
My house had was a rental. It had a huge central room surrounded by windows and then little bedrooms, and the stairwell room, which I turned into a bedroom, and the garage room, which I turned into a bedroom. And, well, sometimes the porch was a bedroom. So I just found as many ways as I could to fit people in but make it feel spacious and the place you want to be. But it had a huge back garden. And it was in this Sesame Street kind of street full of characters and no traffic. So there'd be people playing guitar on their doorsteps, and on Australia Day my house would get the barbie in the little tiny front garden and just cook for sausages for passers-by. And
what are your thoughts on the idea of the city as we conceive it today, this kind of modern maybe anonymous, kind of disconnected concrete jungles, talk about somewhere like Tokyo. Like, what are your general thoughts on cities as a concept?
Well, I love cities. I live in a city or the country and not suburbia. I've always been, since I turned into an adult, terrified of suburbia, because human connection is my currency, and cool humans. So people who... my house in Sydney was like a catchment zone for people who'd come to Sydney to do public speaking, or because they'd written a book, or they're doing a really cool PhD at the university. So I just was waiting for the best people and trying to get them into my house. Excellence is just the best thing to live with, and you get in an upward spiral. And you have to be excellent at everything, just something. So the criteria for my house was you had to have a dream of making a better world. And that was it. And it could be, I want to bring aromatherapy to the old people's homes of Japan. And, okay, you're in. That's so cute. I want to support you. Or I want to make Japanese paper earrings and sell them in markets and find an Australian husband. Sure, I'll be part of that. Yeah. And when someone's got a dream and, they mess up or something, I can still love their dream, and it feels like loving them, and it just smooths everything.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful way of living, and
yes.
It certainly feels like it can be assaulted on all sides by outside forces. They're sort of, how do you maintain that sort of flower of love, I guess you could say, and that sort of spirit? Because it can be fostered by its environment, but it can also be trampled by its environment. And I guess my questions around the city refer to this idea of commuting and taking the subway and being stuck in these concrete buildings and kind of working away in this mode that we have.
That.
You know what I'm talking about?
That is like a subculture that exists. And to me, it's like a shadowy subculture. But to everyone else, it's kind of normal. That's who they know. Like, I don't know many normal people. Yeah. I know people who've got no money and float around, or they've got so much money their hobby's collecting islands. But people in the middle, I don't know, they're just unattracted to me, or I don't know, they're busy.
It's like just grey goo, I mean, those are humans, but sorry.
They got hypnotised is how I see it. Like, I can't talk to you because you're hypnotised, so it just bypasses the cerebral cortex. And
well, something I've been dealing with a little bit lately, just reflecting back on these last few years, especially with the COVID situation as well. And I realised, I kind of ejected myself, and I was already halfway out the door, but I've ejected myself from this normie culture that we're speaking of, and it's now kind of like, well, shit, what do I do? Because that's actually quite a big cohort, and they're all just waiting for the next thing, and they're all following the directives and following the playbook that somebody wrote, I don't know who, and I'm not part of that system anymore.
How do you know Bitcoin's not part of that system? Like, how do you know you're not hypnotized?
That's a good question. I mean, I think there's connections between all things. Who really lives in their own little world? We're always touching shoulders with each other, and even the most isolated communities in the world have some form of trade or engagement. But it's kind of like, what are your directives? What are you trying to do?
Well, my dream is that every street has a share house like mine, where people can come and live for a weekend or 2 years or 2 months, and learn the culture of sharing and like Japanese ways. Like I couldn't run my share houses if I didn't do tea ceremony, or I really couldn't. I learned so much from Japan. I couldn't do it if I didn't know permaculture. And that there's like different character houses. So there's the house of ladies who knit, and there's like the headbangers house of guys who like loud music, and they just love each other. They're like sloths with their tree, and they don't want to live anywhere else. Yeah. And so they're good to each other, and they don't like fudge the rent or fail to do whatever's important in that house.
Well, there's a sense of responsibility, perhaps.
Well, that's a heavy word, and I don't do discipline, duty, responsibility. I just do love, or not. Probably even love's a bit too. I do what attracts me or motivates me, or what I admire. Like I want to be good to what I admire, so it hangs around me more.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Incentives for doing. Trying to do what you're attracted to, and then you attract more of that.
Yeah.
Where is your focus? These kinds of things. Yeah.
Like I don't naturally want to wash the dishes at night, but I love people who love living in a clean house. So to make them not be angry at me, I wash the dishes, and I do it with joy in my heart, because then they'll stay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got this this melting pot of different kinds of culture, and we're talking about your Sydney share house setup. You've got different kinds of people that are living together, and this is the nature of the city. It's a meeting place of ideas and different kinds of people. How do you see that relating to, say, rural living and kind of going off the grid and these kinds of ideas?
I did that too.
Okay.
So after I turned this house into permaculture paradise in Sydney, like having volunteers working full-time beautifying, my landlord asked for the house back, as happens. And, I just cried my tears, and I knew I wasn't going to get another similar house and start from zero. So I put the word out and said, I shall live in the most beautiful farm in Australia, and I'll help declutter it and bring my volunteers, because I always have volunteers who help me with my work, and will further beautify the farm and make it the world's loveliest farm. And I found the most beautiful farm called Garden Farm, 3 hours out of Melbourne. And I moved in. The farmer couldn't believe it when the truck unpacked like chair after opulent chair. And he said, oh my God, Marie Antoinette's moving in.
Wow.
And I rented my own little cottage for $100 a week, and I would just give it to Airbnb on the weekends I wasn't there. So basically it was free. And I helped the farmer declutter his house, which meant his kids started visiting more. And his ex-wife even came and stayed. And then he got tiny houses, which were very profitable. A tiny house company put them on his land. They're self-contained, and they need to be in a beautiful wild place. So he's getting $250 a night from them. He gets to keep half. He made sure they had their own water, their own solar electricity, their own compost toilet, their solitude. And it's ticking along well. And I am still, although I don't live there anymore, I'm still the permaculture ally and consultant and beautifier. So he's now doing what we think is the best thing for an uncertain future, like the very best ultimate plan. So it's a beautiful farm. It has been growing everything: sheep, cows, apple pies, goose eggs, everything. Now it's got money with the tiny houses, but they could disappear at any time. He doesn't own the tiny houses. They're a money share thing. He's making a caravan park. You know how there's flotillas of ladies of a certain age who never married and don't have a mortgage? They buy caravans and they just travel around Australia together, and they love each other. But if they have a falling out, they just say, I'm going to Cairns. And so it's very free. There's no force or economic ties and unwilling connection. So I'm designing little caravan spots with a pond and a baffle of trees so they don't see there's anyone else there, and their own little area. And if they want to stay and grow their veggies for a year, they can. And we're making it more of a survivor place. So we'll actually have a rooster so that, we can keep that part of protein going. He catches all his own water, of course. So it can be a little hideout.
Yeah. Well, just come back though. You talk about clutter and then simplicity, and I'm wanting to drill into those a bit more conceptually. Like, tell me more. Like, what do you think are the sort of roots of that kind of clutter thing in the modern world?
Well, in living memory, people were dying of starvation in Tokyo. My ancestors had no food in Ireland and pushed their 16-year-old daughter onto a big boat who came alone to Australia. She did find a nice husband, but, he's Irish, so the Irish are all traumatised. So he'd drink, and once a month he'd take the dray and take the lambs to town. And soon after he left, she'd set off and walk to town, like it would take a day. And she'd meet him in the pub, and she'd say, "Come on, hand it over." And he'd give her the money he just earned from selling the lambs, and they'd go back together. That was so he wouldn't drink it. It was really hard to just survive for most of human history. And that's an epigenetic trauma that's in our cells and our lizard brains. We express it differently. Like, we've all got our own little monsters inside that are trying to keep us alive in their uninformed ways. You got to talk to them and calm them down. And so that's one root of not wanting to let go. And we all have clutter for different reasons. Some, they want to hold love and they keep things that are sentimental, and some want to just grab the mayonnaise samples and the sushi little packets and it was free. Some just want bargains. I got a bargain. Maybe Bitcoin is that for people. So why do people want to buy Bitcoin? I don't know. But I think it's mostly our lizard brain makes our economic decisions, and then our cerebral cortex rationalizes it afterwards, is what I believe.
Well, John Keynes does talk about the animal spirits that drive people's decision-making, and there is an argument that economics is flawed in its ways, that it looks at logical actors in a sense that's actually maybe not so logical, the way we do things and what we're incentivized by. But so you're saying, so clutter, I guess, as a concept is related to a sense of kind of hoarding, a sort of sense of wanting to hold on to things, given our history of, hunger and, environmental struggles. We sort of, when now that things are so good, we still desire to sort of hold on to things, perhaps.
Hold on to, or there, millions of dollars of advertising are all focused on you and your little wallet, and they want your money, and they're so good at getting it. The colourful packaging, they know exactly what we like.
If we contrast that though with simplicity and this idea that you can maybe let go of things you can do with less. Like, tell me more about that. Like, how do you come to that?
Well, I'm still on my own decluttered journey. At the moment, all my stuff is in storage, a storage unit, and I'm just floating around because I'm not getting my next house until I know I'm not losing it, because I've made and lost houses with so much love so many times. So I'm just, holding on in there. But I don't see it as letting go. Like, empty space is more valuable than crappy clutter. And I'm filling a space with beautiful design and cool people and nice parties. And I'm letting go of something so cheap and crappy. So I don't actually call it, I'm not a declutterer, I'm a home harmonizer. And the first thing I do when I have a client is I get them to get their camera and go around the house and take close-ups of combinations they find beautiful, like colours that just make each other look so good or that have a vibe. And they go around the house and I say, it's got to be like a postcard that someone would want to buy. And they're shocked by the beauty they created. And then I get them to go and take anti-postcards of horrific, combinations, and it's like the cords and breakfast packages ripped open and old receipts. I think, what is this doing in my house? And they see for the first time, I create beauty and I create this. Let's just increase the beauty that I'm already creating and let's decrease that. And that's very motivating to see it's pre-existing. They're not doing anything new or going against their nature. Interesting.
How do you see the idea of, say, creating something longer term, this kind of project that you're talking about, like a share house or something that's kind of a little bit more longer focused, even though sometimes it comes to an early end. How do you see the difference between, say, wanting and trying to fulfill immediate desires versus longer term value? Like,
I think 10% of us live in the future, and like when we just make do with a saucepan instead of a kettle to boil our water, it makes us feel rich. And other people, that would make them feel poor. Like, I want things now. I want to be someone that's got stuff. So first, I think it's a personality trait, but it can be cultivated. Like in my classes, like yesterday in my workshop, I was teaching people about like a little trick I use when I don't want to like wash the dishes, we'll say. I do this gesture, like my hands under my chin, this little look of love to my future self and say, future Cecilia, who's going to wake up in the morning and see a really clear kitchen, beautiful sparkling sink. I'm doing this for you because I love you. Yeah. And I do the cute gesture and I send it and I feel it in my body and my heart, and it gives me the energy to do the crappy work even though I wanted to sleep. And then I wake up. And it's like catching a kiss that someone's blown you. Oh, you shouldn't have. And I do the gesture of my hands clasped under my chin. So the current us can send love to the future us. And if we don't, we're in trouble. Like I complain about all the people ripping me off, the government ripping me off. No one rips me off more than I rip myself off. And it's true of all of us. Yeah.
I understand. That sort of makes sense. That's a interesting way of putting it, and the way that I would approach that thing you just described. You know, your work. We work, but then what do we do if we, like the example you gave before, you just drink it away, or you waste your value, you waste your money in the immediate. But if you can build it into the future, you can send it into the future, you can do wonderful things, you can kind of contribute to something greater. And we struggle in the existing financial system to be able to do that in a way because of inflation, because of the debasement of our monetary supply, so that you're generally incentivized to spend that money straight away. Yes,
I've been saving most of my life, because when I was young, I lived in Japan for 6 years. And I decided I wanted to teach the richest people in Japan. Like I wanted to decimalize. It was just a thing back in the 90s. Let's just add an O to what you do. So I wanted to get 10 times more than anyone else got paid. So I had to find really rich clients. And I did. And then I saved it. And I keep forgetting about the zero. And I think, well, I worked so hard and that's all I've saved. And then I'd realize, oh, no, there's an extra zero. Oh, my God. And that was really good to be like just disinterested in it. And I put it in ethical investments, and I just ignored it for 10 years. And then, oh, wow, it looks like is that doubled? And so it was nice. But then something happened and I got skinny. This may sound weird. I had to leave Japan, visa running out. It was heartbreaking. I didn't want to be in Australia. I turned from an important person with a house full of pets and flowers and bunny into this homeless person with no job in Australia. And I got really skinny. And I was like living off the interest on my savings because I didn't want to be an employee, but I hadn't started being a permaculture designer. I got really skinny. And I thought, I realized intuitively, if I spent my money, I'll put on weight. I will get me out of starvation mode. So I actually did 3 things. I started drinking and breathing more, and I forced myself to spend my money. And I put on weight. Oh, and I joined a gym, which was a way to spend money, and use my adrenaline physically instead of emotionally worrying, how am I going to make a life for myself and be an important lady again like I used to be. And I did it. So how we use our money reflects what we're doing with our emotions. I totally believe that because of that little miracle. Like for 5 years, I tried to force myself to eat and it just wasn't working. I was so skinny.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think, though, the idea of saving for the future, I mean, I think that's losing its appeal. It's not even really common sense anymore, because how do you save for the future?
Because of inflation and things like that.
Yeah.
So I was lucky. I saved so that in my 30s, I could just be a permaculture designer and charge people or not charge people. And I'd just work whether I got paid or not. That was really nice. And because I'd allowed myself to eat my capital. Then I keep changing my attitude to spending. And then when they were printing money in the COVID era, I thought, I think I'll do things differently. So I might have bought some Bitcoin. But still, my main investment is in social capital and people and my skills and my mental, spiritual growth. I'm so much a better person I was than 4 years ago. I really invested in being more competent, making protocols, writing them down, emailing them to myself so that I can be really capable and people want to work with me.
Yeah.
They won't say, what a floozy. She turned up late.
Yeah.
She left spelling mistakes in this.
Yeah.
So I've been tightening that up, and my sister's amazed. Wow, you've really come along.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting as things get tough, and I think there is a sense, a zeitgeist of, toughness is coming, and if not, we've already seen quite a lot of it over the last few years. In those times, you kind of have to get to work, and you have to create value, and you eventually do, whether you want to or not, you have to partake in some kind of human relations, and create value for others. Otherwise, you sort of living on the edges, and really that is doable to an extent, but it eventually becomes quite vulnerable as well, because
the precariat.
Yeah, well, who do you go to when you've got no one else, and so this idea of, I guess, the current situation, which I don't plug into too much myself, but I mean, what is your general thoughts on where the world is going in terms of themes, or like how would you even think about such a thing?
So I'm a bit of a disaster bunny. I'm simultaneously very positive and very negative. They're in different parts of the brain. You can do both at once. It's very easy. So part of me sees the world as the people who let themselves be herded will be herded. And I lived on a cow farm, and it's not good when you're herded. Like, it's really green grass and beautiful until that one bad day. It's really sad in Australia. There's 14% of children refuse to go to school. This happened since COVID. If you were a kid and you got locked up and suddenly your world came to an end and you couldn't see other children and everyone you trusted suddenly seemed weird, I maybe wouldn't want to go to school either. The younger you are, the harder you are to lie to, because it's really hard to get out of childhood alive for all of history for most children. You really got to read adults well. So adults lie to themselves pretty easily, but it's harder to lie to a child. It just totally confuses them. Here's someone I trust saying something really weird. I personally remember all the times adults lied to me. I can sit down and tell you for an hour. So we've got a lot of mental problems in Australia. We have a lot of children that can't do anything. They can't cook. Their mothers are at their wits' end. I've joined a lot of ADHD parents and children groups on the internet, and these poor mothers live in heartbreak hell. Their children are throwing knives at them and they can't manage them. They love them, and this is increasing. These children are going to be adults soon with no education, no skill, no interpersonal skills. There's them. A lot of people will lose their work. I've just discovered DeepL translation. Suddenly, I can write all my emails in Japanese. I can post on Facebook in Japanese. My Japanese isn't good enough to write in, but I can read it. So I can auto-translate with AI. And it's
pretty incredible.
It's amazing. AI is so wonderful.
Yeah, well, especially anything in the computer world, it can kind of just master it. It's no good in the real world in the sense of it can't plant a tree, but it can certainly write an email or do anything that would traditionally be information work, right?
So I'm seeing this huge gap. I feel it could be feudal, having two different species of humans, dormitory humans who are forced to live in dormitories on money given by the government, and they don't get to choose what they eat. They're just given a package of food at the start of the week and they play computer games all day or are given virtual reality goggles. So there's a whole lot of them. And then there's the people who put them there, so the slimy evildoers, and they hate their life too, so they drink at night. And then there's this tiny little class, which I think I'm going to be in, of people who sort of sneak around the system and can have a pretty good life, but they're going to have to learn camouflage. They're going to have their own little, I imagine, like an underground connection of share houses and farms where interesting people come and be useful and be excellent and cook for each other. And it's a bit like the novels that I've been reading all my life, like Ursula Le Guin novels, science fiction novels, where, you know, the cool people who, you know, make great inventions and are like Steve Jobs also come and wash the dishes and partake in being human.
Yeah.
That's how I imagine it might be.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, I certainly see aspects of that, and I'm sort of looking at it quite closely. It's hard to say, you know, we certainly have a lot of people who are preoccupied with their phones and sort of the current thing, and it sort of distracts them from the actual tsunami wave of change that's happening. And as you say, a lot of jobs may become redundant and just not even relevant. And so what do you do with those people? You know, and especially if they haven't really got any other skills. And then you talk about this is like universal basic income and sort of the dormitories putting on the goggles, and we're seeing Apple and these companies, you know, you talk about Steve Jobs, but now Apple's coming out with these kind of new realities and these augmented realities, and they feel like a bit of a perversion to going out and actually being in reality. You know, there's just something kind of uncanny
It's terrifying
about the goggles, you know. And then we've got the permaculture guys and girls out there on the edges, and maybe perhaps the Bitcoiners as well. We should get together. I think so.
Yeah.
Because there's certainly, I mean, the amount of craftsmanship, the amount of passion for nature, for farming, for doing things in a long-term sustainable way that I see in Bitcoin, it really reflects what you've shared today around permaculture. And I'm actually part of a group that's kind of like Bitcoin times permaculture, and they sort of share what they're working on, because there's so much technology now available. You've got solar panels, you've got you know, basically personally accessible stuff that maybe 30, 40 years ago wasn't as accessible, so that you can actually be relatively self-sovereign, and you can live off the grid in a very comfortable and nice way. But then you can also network and connect with others, so you're not in a hermitage. You know? That sounds pretty interesting to me.
It does. There's, you know, a lot of permies who say Bitcoin, it's just greenwash. It just uses so much energy, and they're tricking themselves that they'll be okay in the future. What happens if the electricity goes off and they can't use their Bitcoin? And climate, like, these guys are delusional.
Yeah.
And they don't want to be your friend.
Well, it's unfortunate that there's a kind of layering of political messaging where, you know, I mean, the climate, the energy use and the kind of climate impact are sort of cited by people who don't know anything about either topics. And the reality is, as we talked about, I mean, Bitcoin is extremely complementary to having an abundance of energy, and in many ways it can help decarbonize, and it can help the environment in ways that wouldn't otherwise be possible because of the nature of Bitcoin mining. And it's almost like it takes a bit of curiosity and open-mindedness to see that. Similar to how the internet, it was easy to criticize if you didn't know it. It was sort of new. And you say, oh, we're never going to use that. You know, what if the electricity goes offline? We can't use this thing. Why would we trust it? But now, I mean, how else would you communicate between Japan and Australia, between any country, between any community without the internet these days, you know?
Yeah. Aerograms, I remember them.
Tie it to the foot of a pigeon. But look, I think there's certainly some connections. I am keen to explore this in the future a bit more, this kind of alternative ways of living, you know, kind of more connected ways of living. And it's sort of a certain wholesomeness to it. I don't know how else to describe it, a certain loving vibe, which it's quite nice in this crazy world we live in of noise.
Yeah, it's really good if every moment of your life is poetry. Like working in the garden and there's birds singing, and now I'm washing the dishes and the bubbles are bubbly, and now I'm repairing the holes in my dress, and I'm so clever, and at the focus, I'm not thinking about my problems. And daily life can be a joy. And I was just reading Satish Kumar, and he was talking about the Kama Sutra and how it's a book of the 60 skills or however many you've got to have to be a good person. You've got to be able to grow flowers. You've got to be able to delight someone in bed. You've got to be able to build your house. You've got to be able to sew your clothes. And saying, oh, this sounds good. These are inherently fun things to do. And even if you're not suited to doing them yourself, it's nice if you've got a friend or a sister or a wife who can do them, and you do what you do for her or him. So this is good to have communities of skilled people. I think we go a bit weird if we're not using a really broad range of skills daily. So if you're just on the internet making money, you'll be weird. Like my friend's friend worked in the stock market, and every minute of his life was being on the making a profit, trying not to make a loss. And he got very rich and then thought, oh, I'll try and find a wife. But he just had the wrong energy to find a wife because he wanted a bargain and he wanted to get more than he could give, or he thought they were trying to get a bargain out of him. So energetically, he'd ruined his life.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things about Bitcoin that's quite profound, is that in a way, for me, you can put your value there and then you don't have to think about it again. And the modern world we live in, especially for young people, it's like, well, what investments am I going to make? How am I going to get onto the housing market? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And it requires quite a lot of brain power just to keep your head above water, especially in a place like Sydney. It's so expensive. And it's almost like, with Bitcoin, you just put your value there. It goes up, it goes down, but you know that it's more secure than any central bank, any bank. They will all go to zero, and Bitcoin will be the thing that's left. And then you can actually focus on what you do with your life. And we see this quite common in the Bitcoin world, where it's kind of like, well, what do you do now? And then you start moving up that hierarchy of needs. You'll be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and self-actualization, and sort of, now that you've kind of fulfilled that immediate thing, you can actually move up and you can become a permaculture designer, you could become an artist, you can become a father or a mother or whatever it is that you actually want to do, and you're not just your job anymore in the narrow sense. I did
that of being an English teacher when I was in my 20s. It's not that hard.
Just unplug. Work through
it. But to give yourself margin so you can be human is so important, and everyone should do it, I think. But back to what you were saying about the Bitcoin world. Is the Bitcoin world not divided? Like, there must be Bitcoiners who you think they're just woeful. What galahs. They just want to get rich. They're not my people. Like in every organization that's strong, like Christianity, you can be the worst or the best of people. It can take all the value out of people, or it can be the saving of you. Is Bitcoin like that?
I think so. There's definitely a lot of different types of people, and it's kind of this, it's got this interesting mechanism where it kind of promotes a certain form of truth-seeking and self-reflection that you don't necessarily get in other organizations. And so they're a very contentious bunch, let me put it that way. But out of that, there's certainly a huge number of people who have found a sort of that self-actualization that I described. They're understanding that, okay, there's this way where I can preserve the value that I'm creating today for the future. And maybe this is kind of a Bill Mollison type thing, but, I can plant a tree for the future now. Whereas before, you're just kind of on this treadmill, this kind of hamster wheel of, working, sleeping, going back to work. And
sounds terrible. Don't do it.
Yeah. But look, Cecilia, I really appreciate your thoughts on this, and for you coming out to the studio here. So if people want to follow your work, if they want to...
Oh, please do.
Yeah, where can they find you?
Well, come to one of my webinars. They are amazing. They're very practical. It's 2 hours, and we actually get you learning permaculture principles and doing a revolution in your house on the spot, before and after photos. And your husband comes home, or your wife, and says,
I saw some of your before and after photos from the place you did recently,
yesterday.
And that was pretty incredible.
Yes.
It was like a different house.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Like miracles can happen so quickly. That's why I love permaculture. It's a miracle because nature is miraculous. And we've had a nature, and we're miraculous. So you would Google Cecilia Macaulay. Even Zen Permaculture will probably get you to me. Cecilia Permaculture, and up I'll come. Sign up to my mailing list, and every now and again I'll send an inspirational story that will make your life better. Yeah. And maybe you'll be my friend and live with me, or I'll help you set up a share house full of gorgeous people that make you smile when they walk in the room.
Yeah, awesome. And I thought I'd finish here with a quote from Bill Mollison. Though the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions are embarrassingly simple.
Oh, Bill, I love you.
All right. Thank you very much, Cecilia.
Thank you, Cody.
Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am codyellingham, and that was the transformation of value. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.